Welcome to the 1905 podcast. Joe and I have been going to Stamford Bridge for over 30 years. For the past 3 years, we've been exchanging voice notes on everything from the highs in Porto to the lows of Potter. Each week, this podcast will take you inside our unfiltered thoughts on all things Chelsea, sharing our view from Gate 13 of the Matthew Harding stand. Let's hit the notes. This week, we take a look at the positive signs in pre-season so far, and the players staking a claim to be key parts of Maresca's new look Chelsea. We discuss the latest rumours linking Chelsea with Victor Osimhen, and get the media perspective on Todd Boehly Clearlake from journalist and Chelsea fan Owen Phillips. To kick off, let's start with a voice note from me on my pick from pre-season so far. The first thing that I really wanted to talk about was Nkunku. He is showing us, I think, what we really missed last season. I was so excited when we signed him because I watched quite a bit of him over in Germany, and he obviously was absolutely unreal there in terms of the goal scoring side of things. But I think probably an underrated part of his game for a lot of people who haven't seen him play a lot is just how good he is as an all-round player. I know a lot of people in France think his best position is actually as an attacking number 8, which is kind of what we've seen him doing in pre-season, actually, in Maresca's shape. And I think you just see he's got a bit of everything. He's obviously brilliant on the ball in terms of taking people on. You saw that with that ridiculous slalom dribble against Club America to win the penalty late on, which was fantastic. He's got a really good range of passing. We saw that a little bit last season. I remember being at the Palace game at home, and he pinged a couple of really good 40, 50-yard balls from the centre spot out to the wide men. So he's got a bit of that in his game as well. And then obviously he's a really good finisher. We've seen that a little bit, obviously, at Chelsea. But when you go back and watch the goals he scored in Germany, he has a bit of everything. He's decent in the air, good on both feet, and has that knack that I think we missed at times last season of just knowing where to be in the box to kind of pick up those scrappy goals when you need them. And obviously, in pre-season, he's scored a couple of penalties, which obviously he may not be taking those when Palmer comes back, as we know. But obviously having a couple of good options there is very useful. But I think people, understandably, because we've basically not seen him for a season, have kind of maybe underrated just how big an impact he could have on the team. And I can't wait to watch him play with Palmer. Honestly, I think he's up there as good as Palmer, and we've talked about how good. I mean, everyone can see how good Palmer is, but I think the two of them, if Maresca can work out how to get the best of both of them in the system, is actually pretty terrifying, to be honest. So I think he's been a massive plus of pre-season already, and just getting minutes and under his belt, looking sharp again. And I'm very, very excited to see what he does next season.
To be honest, mate, unlike some other people who seem to think that it's the end of the world at the moment by losing to Celtic and drawing with Wrexham. Yeah, we're not gonna jump on the panic bandwagon just yet, because we understand what it's all about. And quite frankly, those players that are coming back from injury who don't want to get re-injured in a game against Wrexham or Celtic, I can completely understand that. I know at some point you do have to kind of put the foot down a little bit and get your minutes in properly and actually start working as hard as you can in some of these pre-season games. But at the very beginning, it's a case of, can we keep everyone fit? Can we keep everyone healthy? And, go back to London with a fully fit team and give Maresca a load of headaches in terms of who he's going to pick, opposed to just picking a team from people that are fit and available, which is basically what happened last year. You mentioned Nkunku in your voice note to me earlier. If you think that he wouldn't have made a difference to our team last year, I mean, we only finished just outside the top 4, really, in the end. We were only a few points behind Spurs and Aston Villa. And I think a fit Nkunku probably gains us those points to get into the top 4, I would have said, comfortably, with how good he is and the amount of goals and assists he would create for other players. I have no doubt in my mind that with a fully fit Nkunku, we would have been very, very high up last year. Even though we weren't brilliant, he would have made the difference between kind of finishing 6th or 4th. I do believe that. And if you look at Maresca's pre-season last year with Leicester, it really wasn't very good. I mean, in the last game, they got absolutely thumped by Liverpool 4-0, and then won 13 of their first 14 league games. Okay, it was the Championship, but I think if Chelsea won 13 of their first 14 league games in the Premier League, we'd all be pretty happy with that. So, again, if you want to go and panic and go on every social media site and tell everyone that this team is dreadful and it's the worst team they've seen in 100 years and all that sort of nonsense, then be my guest. But like I say, we're not going to do that. And to those people that said that our medical department was completely pathetic last year and, you know, the injuries we got and things like that, well, you can't have it both ways. The fact that Colwell didn't play yesterday in the Club America game was because they were managing his load. They realised that he's probably at that limit where he needs a rest. And there'll be plenty of players like that. And that's why Carney didn't play. He was on the bench, but he didn't play because, again, coming back from injury, don't want to risk him getting re-injured again. You can't have it both ways. You can't want everyone to play every minute of every game, and then when they get injured, say, "Oh, the medical department are absolutely inept and stupid." It doesn't go hand in hand.
Another big thing that I think has been interesting in pre-season, and I hear this a lot and people don't quite understand it, is the fullbacks. So under Maresca's system, obviously it's been well talked about that one of the fullbacks inverts into centre midfield, and we've seen a bit of a mixture there already, haven't we, with Reece James doing it from the right, with Gusto even doing it from the left, and lots of other variety as well. The thing that people keep missing, and it's really frustrating me because the more I hear it, I'm like, no, that isn't how the system works, is the other fullback doesn't bomb on and become an attacking fullback. The other fullback cuts in and ends up being like a third centre-back. So a lot of people have been saying, oh, it should be Cucurella who inverts on the left, because that way you've got Reece James and Gusto still, you know, bombing down the right, which obviously they're both brilliant at. But actually in this system, that isn't how it works. So we've seen it where, for example, against Club America, Gusto was actually playing off the left and he was inverting into centre midfield, which meant Reece James becomes the right-sided centre-back and it becomes a back three. So I keep hearing it on different podcasts and YouTube and stuff and just being like, no, that isn't how it works. It's going to, you know, whether you like it or not, and, you know, I love watching those fullbacks get forward, but this is the shape. This is the Maresca system. And unless he drastically has a change of heart of how he wants to play, which I think is very unlikely, people are going to have to get used to it. So I think it's very interesting that he is looking clearly to try and get Gusto in the team where he can as well. Obviously, Reece James misses the first 3 games of the Premier League season, doesn't he, with the suspension? So you'd imagine Gusto will be playing on the right, and I think it'll be kind of fascinating actually to see how they end up doing it with Cucurella or Gusto or obviously Reece James and all the other options, kind of who inverts. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I think in pre-season, it's one of the things that's probably been most fascinating tactically, actually, of how that works. You see it right from kickoff. It almost looks mad, doesn't it? I sent you a screenshot of from kickoff. Basically, Gusto stood next to Lavia in centre midfield, and you're like, he's playing left back, and it's just, it kind of really sums up, I think, how kind of unique that setup is. So yeah, that's something to keep an eye on, I think.
I think what was really interesting to me was how well our midfield played against Club America. We'd seen against Celtic and Wrexham there'd been, again, some kind of loose minutes, people kind of, like I say, feeling their way back into first team football. But you sort of saw actually Lavia and Dewsbury Hall, you could see they'd worked with Maresca before. You sensed that they understood exactly what he was asking of them, and they were able to execute that. And I think I've said it a million times, the centre of the pitch is so important. If you lose the midfield battle against anybody, you're going to struggle. If Chelsea play a League One team, you know, in the League Cup next year or the FA Cup, and you don't win the midfield, you probably won't win the game unless you're really, really lucky. It's probably the biggest and hardest position to play. You've got to be good enough in attack to try and score some goals and create some things, and also have a defensive mind on you that you can chase back, defend one-on-one against some top attackers, win headers, be scrappy, you know, give away fouls where you need to. You have to have such an array of skills to do that. And what was nice was that Lavia and Dewsbury Hall understood the defensive part of their game. The amount of times they broke play up, made the last tackle, you know, essentially just did a lot of the donkey work, and they weren't afraid to do it. And I thought that was really interesting. And you sense that with Maresca, with his post-match comments about both of them, particularly Dewsbury Hall, was that he's sort of saying that he's teacher's pet, and that it's kind of all in good humour, but the players will know this. And I said this a couple of weeks ago in a note on the pod, was that he's going to be really pivotal for us in this early part of the season, because until everyone's up to speed properly, he's the one that can go into that position fairly carefree and basically dominate. And the fact he's so skillful, he's able to kind of, his success rate with his dribbles is really, really high. And with that, he draws fouls. He's not afraid to drift wide. And kind of, as you noticed with when Sterling was playing last night in the first half, you could see that he wasn't afraid to go there and help. He wasn't just kind of sitting in the middle of the park, kind of hoping the ball comes to him. He was willing to go and express himself and put himself in positions that not many central midfield players do. And obviously he got his reward with the cross for Mark Gui's goal. And overall, you notice with him that he knew when to go, he knew when to stay, and he actually got on the end of a Sterling cutback and then Nkunku cutback. And he didn't score either of those goals, those chances, but you get the sense that if you keep putting yourself there and you keep making yourself available in time, you could find yourself in double figures for goals for Chelsea next season if he plays enough games. And I think he could be really important. I think for me, Nkunku is the one you want to see. I'm really, really keen on seeing Dewsbury Hall in a really competitive team against proper Premier League opposition next year. I think he's the one player that I'm quite excited about. I don't know why. When we signed him, I just got this real buzz about him, and I've obviously seen him play for Leicester, but I just sense that he's a player that we have been missing, because he's got such quality on the ball. His crossfield passes are fantastic. His general kind of short-range passing, his long-range passing is really good. Against Club America last night, you also noticed that he was able to kind of just play that death weight past into, I'm not sure who it was, it might have been Nkunku, for an attack where we didn't score from it. But again, it's the weight of pass is perfect. He's not just a player that whacks the ball from A to B 60 yards and then a bit like Paul Pogba used to do and kind of go, that was wonderful. He knows every little part of the game in that position, and I think he's going to be incredible. And I think Lavia too, you notice with him driving into the box inside the first 3 minutes and drawing the penalty. We haven't seen a lot of that from our central midfield players. I don't think Enzo's that type of player. I don't think Caicedo's that type of player. So to have two that are willing to do that from midfield and potentially want to score goals, which has been an area where we've been really struggling from midfield. We don't score many. Enzo doesn't score many. Caicedo doesn't score many. And like you said before with Jorginho and Kovacic in the past, they didn't score many. So we went from Lampard to nobody overnight, and it was really, really worrying. So I'm just really upbeat on those two in particular, and I think you're going to see them possibly start the season. I don't know how we'll play it with Enzo and Caicedo. I think Caicedo will be mixed in sooner rather than later for more minutes. I know Enzo had a few last night, but I do believe that it's worth playing the players that know the system opposed to people that were bought for a good amount of money in Enzo's case and just playing him for the sake of it. I think you need to get people on the field that understand what's going on, and then as the season progresses and people start picking the system up quicker and quicker and quicker, then they can be brought in for their 90-minute games to give Dewsbury Hall and Lavia a rest. But yeah, really encouraged by those two, and I think it's an area of the field that we have been lacking massively in years gone by. So yeah, pleased with what I saw.
So we're going to hand over to a guest note from Owen Phillips in a moment, who is a Chelsea fan and journalist of nearly 30 years. And to start off, we thought it would be interesting to ask Owen a little bit about why so much of the media seems to be against Boehly and Clearlake in terms of the reporting of the last 2 years, and get his perspective on that. So we'll hand over to Owen now for his thoughts.
Chelsea's new regime, or newish regime, gets a lot of criticism, but it's important to remember that it is still relatively new and they're trying to change so much. And I think that is overlooked quite often because as a journalist, it doesn't create the right headlines. It doesn't provoke the interest. Conflict is always more fascinating and more impactful than everything's a bit nicey and let's give them time and let's see where they go with it. I think it's more important in some respects if you're trying to sell newspapers or fill column inches and online articles to sort of provoke a response. So sometimes I think that's a way some journalists will go. It depends what publication they're writing for or what shows they're appearing on as to which comments they make. And certainly there are programmes out there, I won't sort of necessarily name them, there's certainly pundits out there that I just feel just say stuff for the sheer hell of it. They don't necessarily believe it. So it's trying to recognise that. And I think honesty is absolutely key. It's something I've always tried to do as a journalist. And sometimes you really realise the importance of being honest and being true and sticking to your guns and not just doing something for the sake of it or saying something for the sake of it because you know it's going to be more popular. As a BBC journalist, it's got different standards and a different approach where you can sometimes, there's no pressure necessarily to just chase hits or clicks or coverage and popularity. You can just write an article because it's the right thing to do and it's not necessarily appealing to massive audiences. So that's one take on it.
Hey, it's Chris here with a really quick message. Check us out on Instagram at 1905 Podcast. You'll find video clips, photos, and much more about everything we discuss on the show. Plus, it's a great way to get in touch to tell us your thoughts, share your feedback, or just say hi. Follow us on Instagram at 1905 Podcast. And now, back to the show. Sending you this voice note from poolside in Spain, holiday with the family, and it is absolutely glorious. But I wanted to talk about goalkeepers because we have a new one at Chelsea. Philip Jorgensen from Villarreal, another youngster, of course, but I guess coming in immediately to be a first team signing, really, unlike some of the other players we've got this summer. And I think both of us, we've talked before about the doubts we have over Sanchez in particular and Petrovic, so I think he'll come straight in, would have thought, and certainly be strong competition for Sanchez in pre-season and then see how that plays out when the season itself starts. I was looking at this, and not to depress you, but I thought it would be interesting to have a quick look at how much Chelsea have spent on goalkeepers since Courtois went to Real Madrid in 2018 for the now ridiculous fee when you look back of 35 million we're selling for, which is quite upsetting really when you think just what a good goalkeeper he was for Chelsea and obviously what he's turned out to be at Real Madrid, arguably getting even better. So Chelsea have since then spent £163 million on goalkeepers. Kepa obviously being the big one at 70 million, but since then had Mendy, Bettinelli, free transfer doesn't really count, but Mendy was about 22 million, Slonina, Sanchez, Petrovic, and now Jorgensen. So all of those guys between sort of 15 and 20 million, thereabouts. And it's actually insane when you look at it, isn't it? You know, in one of those moments as a fan when a player leaves the club, as Courtois did, the snake, the way he left obviously was terrible, wasn't it? And rightly given a lot of stick when he's been back to the bridge a couple of times. But when a player leaves and you kind of think, okay, you know, always disappointing, but, you know, we'll replace him and we move on. And sometimes when a player leaves and years later, you're still struggling to replace them. So it's 6 years on and you're still thinking we haven't found anyone who's come close to being a set number one. So really hope that Jorgensen can break that mould and finally be the one that could sort of stake a claim to the number one shirt for a long time. Kind of mad actually, isn't it, when you look back at that time when actually we were by all accounts quite close to getting Alisson, and probably the way Courtois left actually really hurt us because it was such a sort of a quite a long process, wasn't it, where we thought he was coming back. He'd even talked about not signing a new contract, then he didn't come back that summer to pre-season, ended up having to let him go, and then we ended up missing out on Alisson. And obviously we'd have spent a lot of money on him, probably actually a similar amount that we ended up spending on Kepa, but we'd have been set then for 10 years as Liverpool kind of are with Alisson. and probably, in some ways, you'd say Courtois has the edge probably as a ton of shot-stopping goalkeeper and crosses and stuff. But in terms of a ball-playing goalkeeper that Alisson certainly is, he would have probably fitted in the direction that Chelsea have been wanting to go under Sarri and then even since. So one of those sort of little moments in time when, if you could go back, I'm sure the club would have saved a lot of money, number one, and would wish they could go back and do things slightly differently. But yeah, let's see how Jorgensen does. And I think I know that you're keen to talk about him a bit more. We've seen him in a Chelsea shirt. I think you've spoken quite highly with me about him, having seen quite a bit of him in Spain. So I'm holding out hopes that he'll be good. And yeah, let's hope that we're not back in the situation in 12 months thinking, okay, we need to bring that total up to 200 million plus. But there you go.
It seems Osimhen's time at Napoli seems to have run its course. Not quite as harmonious as it was a year or two ago. So, yeah, the owner there, the chairman, he's quite upfront and vocal, and I'm not sure that racism row that kind of went around with him last summer helped at all. So, yeah, he seems to be pushing for a move, which is, I suppose, good for a buying club. I mean, I think Chelsea have a bit of a trump card there with Lukaku potentially going the other way. Obviously, they'll both be separate deals, but again, it would be another sort of kind of exchange in a way if we did do the transfer for Osimhen. I think PSG are still, like you say, still very much in the hunt for him, and it's not a transfer target that we would necessarily talk about, because if it's a little bit wishy-washy, we don't tend to comment on them, but this one does feel as though it's on the warmer end of the scale of something being done. So I think it's worth noting this week that Osimhen is certainly up for grabs, and it's a player that I think we do need. I think it would certainly bolster us, particularly in that 6 to 18 yard mark, when we get a chance, someone that's just there to poach and snaffle away those chances that we tend to waste so often. I mean, you can't turn down a signing like Osimhen. They don't come around very often. So if it's something we can do, then I think absolutely we'll be up for it. So if in the process we can offload Lukaku's wages and just clear him off the spreadsheet, as it were, and almost be a thing of the past, because the time he's had with us on this second time around has just been an absolute disaster. Yes, we've got some loan fees for him, which has sort of helped nullify the 90 million we paid for him. But obviously we're not going to recoup all of that money, but we are certainly going to come closer than I ever thought we would. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be extremely pleased to see that deal come off. And let's hope the money men can get around the table and actually close this deal out before PSG become even more heavily involved. And as for Gallagher, as we've said in previous pods, I won't go over that again. We don't want to see him leave, but the longer he stays away and he's kept away from the first team and Maresca doesn't work with him, it all becomes a little bit clearer that perhaps the club want to get rid of him. I think he's less on the chopping block than Trevor at the moment, but I think if he was to go to Atletico, he would kind of suit that Simeone system really, really well. He's not your typical Spanish player, but I don't think Atletico Madrid are your typical Spanish team either. They're a bit kick and fight and blood and guts, and I think he would kind of do very well there.
We're going to hand it back over to our guest this week, Owen Phillips, and get his perspective on the new look transfer model under Boehly and Clearlake and how different it is to the Abramovich days. So over to you, Owen.
To go back to the subject of Chelsea's newish regime, Boehly's just taking his time. He's got to learn it. I think people forget that it's not an overnight thing, and we're not talking about something you can do instantly and rip it up and start again and then be successful. It's just massively unlikely, because there are clubs that have followed the blueprint, have got a system in place. Even with Abramovich, if he sacked a manager, everything was in place. He just went out, said, right, what players do you want? Or these are the players you're going to get, with a bit of advice, I'm sure, and they went and got them because they had everything in place. They were privileged because Mourinho, when we could spend money that we wanted to spend, that was exactly what we did. We just went out and bought the very best the rules changed because of it. But we had 2 teams in 2004-5 that could have probably won the league, and we had a good side to start with. Desai, all that lot when we qualified through that brilliant final day of the season against Liverpool. There was great players all the way through that team. So a lot of them coming to the end of their career, Zolas and Petits and Desai's and one or two others. But it was but it was just a good side and a good base to build from. It's slightly different now because we've gone down that different route, and that will take time. But players that you expect a lot more from. This season, it's a make or break, as I've said before. It's just really important that they see it through. And part of that also is the fact that football's changed massively since those days, for the reasons I've said about financial fair play, then profit and sustainability or whatever. There's loopholes. Chelsea have always exploited it with the loan market and done all the best things and the right things. They've got players on their books and had to let them go, and Chelsea get slaughtered for that when it comes to Mo Salah and De Bruyne and what have you. But at the time, would you have picked Salah over Eden Hazard or Willian? No, you wouldn't have done. And Mourinho gave them time, and De Bruyne, apparently, depends what you read and who you believe, that he wasn't entirely happy. He was dropped, played a game. Mourinho was tough on him, so they let him go, and that's the way it is. Younger players get more leeway and more scope, but their rule is obviously have a homegrown player, you get more money, it makes more sense with the financial rules, and if you can sell a few players, and that's where the harsh reality comes in with someone like Conor Gallagher. So you can see the merits in it as a business model, absolutely, because if you get 40 million for him, then it's a great deal. Now, last season, I didn't think or the season before last, technically, I just thought he had potential and he was decent and he looked good at Palace, but when he came in, he didn't seem to fit in. He was running around a bit like a headless chicken at times, but he obviously had plenty about him and he was close. And this season, last season, I should say, he's been a revelation. He's been great, one of our best players. And then it makes you think, why are we thinking about selling him? Well, actually, if you're selling him for 40, 50 million when his stock is high, is that a good deal? Does that make sense? If you can buy someone for 20 million, but it's about the right players, and then you've got to have players along the production line. So you've got that mix of experience, and that's where the model will take a little bit of time, because we can sign 17-year-olds for the season after next or the season after that. But as long as we've got someone coming through this season that can play now, you're expecting much more from Fernandes and much more from Caicedo this season, and Mudryk, and there's plenty of players now with a point to prove. So it's going to be fascinating to see how Maresca brings them together.
Okay, so we end each episode, as always, with the question. And this week's question actually came in through Instagram. So if you'd like to ask us anything, then you can get in touch via our Instagram page, which is 1905 Podcast. And the question came in from Sophie Willard. So thanks for the question, Sophie. And it is really simple. What is our favourite ever Chelsea season? So great question on the eve of a new season. And I'm actually going to pass over to Joe and let him answer this one, because we both have the same answer. And it's a season we've talked about quite a few times, actually, the two of us, when we've got together and reminisced. It's a classic. I'll hand over to Joe and let him give the reasons why it's our favourite season, but I'll add my little bit of flavour to it as well, which is just, I always think when you're a football fan, there's nothing better than winning when the expectations are low. So great, probably the greatest example in Chelsea's history is the 2 Champions League final wins, where we were major underdogs in both of those finals and came through and won. And that feeling is just incredible. I mean, winning any final trophy is amazing, of course, but when you don't expect to win it, it just is even more special. And this particular season, I think, falls in that category, because we went into it, I remember really thinking, if we got top 4 at the start of the season, I'd have been really happy. It was off the back of a disaster season, really, where we'd finished mid-table. Manager Mourinho had been sacked halfway through the season, so I'm giving away a little bit here. And the season just turned around in a magical moment that Joe will talk about, and we never looked back. And I think that feeling of just thinking, do you know what? We've had a season of absolute misery, and then this season of incredible football, incredible performances and incredible results just made it all the more sweet. So I'm going to hand over to Joe to talk through our favourite season.
I think the one that stands out for me is probably Conte in 16-17, because we'd started a bit like this in some ways. It was a little bit of a cloud over the team. We were sort of obviously not a sleeping giant, but we've been a giant that'd been kind of perhaps on the decline for a little bit. And I think people were sort of keen to see what Conte could bring to us. And obviously a lot of my friends who were Spurs and Arsenal fans are a little bit concerned, because he obviously came with a good track record from Juventus, and he played really well with Italy in the Euros, and they didn't actually go as far as I would have liked. But I think the way he galvanised players and galvanised like his coaches and things, and made them all feel part of something. I think that kind of scared a few of my friends off with how good Conte would be. And with those first few games when he came to Chelsea, and okay, we won on the opening day with a sort of last minute Costa winner, but we sort of were a bit scrappy, and then we ended up losing to Liverpool and the infamous, disaster first half against Arsenal, and then this feeling of you sensed he wanted to go three at the back, and he continued to play 4-3-3, 4-1-4-1 to kind of appease the players that were currently there, because that's the formation we'd played for so many years. And it was just him basically going, right, I've tried it your way, now you're going to do it my way. And the second half, we obviously got a 0-0 draw. And I think it was I want to say it was Hull City might be the next game, or certainly maybe the one after, but we went there and we just played really well. And we got a 2-0 win. I think it was Costa and Willian who got the goals. But it was just a really good, solid performance. And it was like the first signs of seeing Alonso in that wing-back role. And you thought, okay, this is interesting. This is different. We haven't seen this before from Chelsea, three at the back for a long, long time. So it was a really interesting road we were going down. And then from there, we just got better and better and better. And you just couldn't see us losing. And we went on that massive 13-game unbeaten streak. And then sadly, obviously, losing to bloody Tottenham at their place around sort of New Year's Day, or that kind of area. And yeah, but overall, the year was it was different. It was interesting. We had some new players come through the team. It was Matic and Alonso, and obviously Costa was banging the goals in for fun. And yeah, just generally, it felt like, oh, okay, we've got a guy here he's able to come in to go away from our traditional four at the back, bring us into a back three, and it was like quite seamless. And I think you agree from the times that we've spoken that it was just a really fun time, wasn't it? And we were quite destructive, and Costa that year was just unplayable. I mean, if you go back, anyone who gets the chance to go back and watch the 16-17 season, you won't believe the goals that Costa scored. They are incredible. In my mind, I thought he was tap-ins and headers, but they are far from tap-ins and headers. But I mean, they really were fantastic. And the year of sort of that first year of Fabregas being his wingman, the balls that he played through and the balls over the top for him. There was plenty of games. The Man City 3-1 win when we were 1-0 down at half-time. I remember us thumping Man United at home when Mourinho was in charge. The 5-0 win when Koeman said it was the best team he'd ever seen, or something in his interview. It was the best team he'd ever played against. He couldn't believe how well we were doing. When Hazard was wonderful. He may have got a hat-trick that day, but he was just unplayable. And he had a great FA Cup run, and that, if you remember, he left some of his starters. I think it was Hazard, Willian and Costa, maybe it was Fabregas, left them on the bench and then brought them all on in the second half to kind of basically throw Spurs off the scent, and then we ended up beating them 4-2 at Wembley. That Matic screamer, if you remember. So yeah, there was loads to remember about that year, and there was some fantastic goals, fantastic games, and just generally, I think Costa kind of led Conte almost from on the field, didn't he? He kind of was like the general, and he kind of was the one that was screaming and shouting and getting the crowd up and getting these other teammates up when Conte wasn't doing it. So it really gave us something to believe in. And I think as a fan, I think when the players feel it and the manager feels it, you go to the game pumped. And the moment the first goal goes in, like first chance gets created and you don't miss, but you feel as though there's going to be more and more and more. you can't help but be excited. So, easy one for me, Conte.
Those were the Chelsea notes for this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, do us a favour and share it with a fellow Blue. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review wherever you're listening. Wherever you may be, stay carefree, and remember, every little thing's gonna be alright.